We recently asked a couple hundred of you emerging biotech leaders about your go-to sources of information when you face tough professional challenges. Your top response wasn't webinars, it wasn't scientific journals, it wasn't trade shows, it wasn't even consultants. Far and away, you said you most often turn to your peers for trusted insight. Enabling a community of peers is what the Business of Biotech podcast is all about. It's also what our new Business of Biotech newsletter is all about. Peer-driven content, no strings attached, delivered to your inbox once a month. Go to bioprocessonline.com/BOB to subscribe. The Business of Biotech is produced by Bioprocess Online, part of the Life Science Connect community, with support from Cytiva. Cytiva also demonstrates its commitment to the leaders of new and emerging biopharma at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. Check that out. According to Grandview Research, a microbiome therapeutics market worth about $95 million in 2022 is expected to grow at a CAGR of more than 38% between now and 2030. Markets and Markets says 36% growth by 2029. BCC Research says 59% by 2027. Pick a number, it doesn't matter. They're all huge projections, and in fact, quite surprising when you juxtapose those bullish forecasts to the number of microbiome therapeutic companies that have recently struggled or altogether shuttered. 4D Pharma, Evolo, Finch, and Kaleido come to mind. But it's not all bad news. Ceres therapy for C. diff was just approved after some failures along the way, but the earlier casualties have come at the hands of a combination of tough capital market conditions that couldn't keep up with cash burn, and some rightful regulatory hurdles associated with the safety of donor microbia. I'm Matt Pillar, and my guest on today's episode of the Business of Biotech is the founder and CEO of a microbiome company that's weathered the regulatory storm, having recently emerged from a clinical hold on its phase 3 program in graft versus host disease. Now, Hervé Affagard is looking to navigate the company to success with microbiota therapeutics aimed at the hemato and immuno-oncology spaces. And he's here to tell us all about it. Hervé, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Welcome for hosting me.
I'm thrilled to have you. And I'm going to get to the market conditions soon enough. Like, I want to get your reflections on that. And I want to talk about what you guys are doing differently in this space to ensure success, especially as late stage as you are. But I want to get to know you first a little bit. Your background is certainly compelling and interesting to me. You earned a master's degree in automation engineering and IT, and you initially applied, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, you initially applied that education in the steel industry. So tell me a little bit about that and why the wholesale change into the life sciences.
Yeah, so it could be, it could look strange, but there's a rationale. In fact, I started working within the IT consulting business. Then I moved to the steel industry. And when I was working on the steel industry, I was in charge of some significant business transformation involving the implementation of ERPs, such as SAP, Oracle applications, e-business suite, the way it is called today. Yeah. And in fact, at that time, a US company, Biorad, contacted me because they had a very significant failure with their distribution system. And their distribution system was based on one of the tools I was mastering, the IT tool I was mastering. So I jumped to Biorad in Paris. Biorad is headquartered in California. And I've started to work with them. First year, we did a very good job with the team. We succeeded in the stabilization of the system. And at that time, Biorad started to do a lot of acquisitions in Europe, deals going from 50 million euros to $500 million. Mm-hmm. Biorad is a family-owned company. I've been involved with the M&A team, mainly because I was good in terms of managing projects with my background. And I've started to review the website, then to discuss with the business team in charge of the instruments. That's a company selling both instruments and reagents for lab testing. So I've started to expand. I had a recognition from the family of Biorad, and that's how it has started for me to go on the business side. So in 2006, I started to go more in international business, the healthcare sector, and started to become like an operation officer instead of being a technical guy. So that's really how it started.
Yeah, that's pretty wild because, you know, I used to cover for a long time. I covered the IT space, and ERPs were in my coverage area. And I know that when you're working in systems implementation, like ERP systems implementation, you get a pretty intimate look at a business, right? Like you get an intimate look at the comings and goings of raw materials and finished product in business. Was that exposure to you know, as I said, the resource acquisition and allocation of the life sciences business intriguing to you? Like, was the product and the sort of the substance of the business intriguing to you, or was it just the systems?
No, honestly, to be very transparent with you, I was working in a small city in France where you have this steel industry, and my girlfriend at that time, she was in Paris working on the finance sector. So there was no opportunity for her to go in the city where I was living. And for me, it was how I've worked 5 years with this company. So that was the good timing for me to do something else. So that's just the way it happened. But then after, the story is different when if you consider my entry into the healthcare sector in 2006, after that, for me, it was obvious that I needed to continue to work on the healthcare sector because I've learned, I would say, at Bio-Rad what's the healthcare sector. Then I've participated to a LBO, leverage buyout, with a lab testing company. And after that, I've created MaaT Pharma. But when I created MaaT Pharma, that was a timing for me where I was really keen in understanding the innovation and everything. And I've been exposed to the microbiome, and I was early on convinced that it was potentially something big in terms of changing the way we're going to be approaching unmet medical need. But it's not the most important. The most important for me was that I'm the son of two parents diagnosed with a cancer. And when I've been exposed to the microbiome, I said, oh my goodness, we have something we have not looked after in terms of certain conditions, which is the case for GVHD, because when I've created the company, there was no drug approved at all in the world. So I said, that is what I want to do. And that's now 9 years. I'm with MaaT Pharma. I've never spent so long in a company, but today for me, it's obvious. So the beginning of my career, it's like a little bit a scale. You go one after one. And now that I've found what I was looking for without knowing it, I'm not willing to change anymore.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I want to talk about what was perhaps a difficult transition. You were a very, very much a systems process oriented guy, and I can see where like that would play well in a role like yours now. But there would also obviously be challenges, right? So what was challenging along the way in making that transition?
So the most challenging for me was to understand the biology and the science behind the microbiome. That was a very big challenge for me. I was lucky enough to be well accompanied by the people I met, researchers, doctors. They trust me from the get-go, and they have spent time with me to teach me what I know today. I've also taken courses on the internet. For example, I've followed massive online courses from the University of Boulder, Colorado. So I've worked a lot to understand the science. And indeed, with the engineer mindset, I would say I've started to apply what I've learned as an engineer together with the new science I was acquiring. And but that was very difficult. For the first 2 to 3 years, that was very difficult because the science today is pretty mature, but at that time, it was really difficult, especially to find the right positioning for the product. Because when I also started the company, Ceres, you mentioned into the introduction, and also Rebiotics, they were already on the field, so they had already taken a position. So for me, there was no option to do a Me Too company. That was really to do something different. So we decided to position ourselves in the field of oncology, which make sense for me because of my own family history. And that was a big challenge because at that time, nobody believed that by modifying the microbiome, you're going to do something on the patient side just by modifying the microbiome. Everybody was thinking it might work in Clostridium difficile, but it's a different story. So the second challenge in top of the science acquisition was really to convince people that we are not esoteric. We know what we do. And I've been working with academic institutions to generate evidences and everything. But this second element was a big challenge as well regarding the journey.
I don't like coming into it from sort of a layman's perspective, if you will, inspired to develop therapeutics in oncology by your own family experience. What did you know at the time, and how did you become aware that there was possibly some link between the microbiome and cancer? I mean, in other words, like if you came in purely with the motivation, like I've got the time, the resources, and the willpower to create a pharmaceutical company that seeks to address oncology. You might start with I don't know, a monoclonal antibody or a cell therapy, for instance. At that time, you just said it, like the link between gut health and oncology had not there. It's still an exploration, right? It hadn't been clearly established. So why would you start there?
I mean, I'll evidence what I'm saying, but intuition was very important. And I've give you support to that intuition. When I started the company, in fact, my mother, she was not diagnosed with a cancer. She had GI issues. It was not a cancer. Immediately after I've created MaaT Pharma, I collected the stools of my mother and I did the sequencing. And when I get the results from the sequencing, I say, oh my goodness, what's going on? And it was full of pro-inflammatory bacteria and everything. So that was even before she got diagnosed with the cancer. And at that time, it took 6 months to get the results of sequencing. Today, it's 2 weeks, just to give you the acceleration. Mm-hmm. But I was that convinced that I said, no, it's not a Crohn's disease, which was the diagnosis. And I've taken the results of the sequencing, and I met with gastroenterologists and everything, and nobody was able to explain to me. They were just saying, it's not a good microbiome, but I don't know what to tell. And like a year ago, there was a publication. So 7 years after, there was a publication in Germany showing that the kind of microbiome that my mother had is a signature of pancreatic cancer. And that was a pancreatic cancer. So that's, for me, how you start from challenging the consensus. It's not what you think, Mr. Doctor. That's something else. I don't know what to do, but let's explore. And from that, I said, no, it's not what you are diagnosing to my mother. And I know it, but nobody was able to put a name on something, which I understand because the science was not there at that time.
Right.
So that's why it's a mix of providing evidences of something which is more on intuition than anything else. But that's how it started for me.
How did so it starts there, and now you've got to rally some support. You've got to get people interested. You've got to get scientists who can help you validate your assumptions interested. You've got to get investors interested to fund what you're doing. So walk us through a little bit of that. How'd you rally that support?
So you started the introduction by saying that the microbiome field is a little bit suffering as we speak today. It's true, like for the entire biotech segment. I think if you look in the US at the number of IPOs since the beginning of the year in the life science sector, that's like peanuts. So the biotech sectors in general is suffering because the investors, they are risk adverse, clearly. The microbiome is not an exception. You mentioned a few companies that failed and some others which are in trouble. So having good investors since the get-go was important. I've been lucky to, in fact, when I started the venture, I was an entrepreneur in residence with an investor. So he immediately invested 2 million euros, which might look ridiculous in the US, but in France, it's pretty decent. And immediately after that, they introduced me to other investors. And because we had a step-by-step approach where we were generating data like every 6 months, we have demonstrated that we are in a position to say something, to claim something, and then prove that we can deliver as per the promise. And we have gained slowly, we have gained the trust in the field. And we had 2 other investors 18 months after. At the end of the day, before the IPO, we had in total 9 investors. And all the investors, they have always reinvested. So the investor from 2014 has reinvested up to the IPO and even after, because we did another follow-up early 23, and they have, again, all invested. So I think it is very important to show that you deliver. And that's where we have been able to aggregate some very good investors, knowledgeable on the field. Most of them, they are knowledgeable with either the innovation in general or more precisely the microbiome. So that was one element. Regarding the second kind of stakeholders, the doctors, we have always involved them into the design of the trial. We have talked a lot with them. We really value their inputs. We are not, like a very big pharmaceutical company where you get what you want from the doctors, and then you do your own protocol. So we are really open innovation, connected, listening to people. And here again, that has helped a lot because the doctors of today, they are the prescribers of tomorrow. And we have worked very well with them. We have good connection with the academic institutions in Europe, based on the fact that we have always co-constructed the plan with them. And I think that's the most important elements. Mm-hmm. France is also a little bit specific regarding the microbiome, I have to say. Among the 6 most prolific publisher of patents, 3 are French academic institutions. The other, they are mainly in the US, and there's one in China. But we have a very good science regarding microbiome. It's an historical business for us. So also it has been super helpful to be in such as an ecosystem. Yeah.
That's interesting. It brings to mind a conversation I recently had with a scientist who had an idea that was not obvious, and she talked about how difficult it was to get investors to buy into an unobvious idea when sort of the mindset is to move with the prevailing wind. So in oncology, I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about how you crafted and communicated the story around your pitch, for instance, because in oncology, as I said, like the investor community is likely to buy. I mean, you look at just the proliferation of ADC, antibody drug conjugates companies in oncology right now. It's huge and growing because it's a trend, right? The wind's blowing that way, and investors are likely to go there. Now a company comes out and they say, well, we think we can affect health outcomes in oncology through the gut. You're bound to get some skepticism, right? So there's a bit more of a storytelling job to be done on your part. So share with us some insight into what that storytelling entailed.
So there's the storytelling, and I would say the positioning as well. When we started in GVHD, there was no drug approved. Just to say a few words on the disease itself, that's a rejection of the stem cells that have been injected to a patient. And it's a pretty difficult disease because, in fact, the immune cells transfer to the patient, they are attacking the tissues on the recipient side. And that's purely an immunological disease. And the immunological disease has been created by the stem cell transplantation itself. So it's not like natural. And it's a very, very difficult condition. And saying from the get-go that you're going to be treating this disease by modulating the microbiome, 90% of the people, they will laugh. And what we did, in fact, is that we said we have good reasons to believe that it will be okay because of X, Y, Z. And immediately after we started, we found, based on that, we found enough money to start. But immediately after we started the clinical trial, also we managed to launch an early access program, a compassionate use program. And here we started to receive requests because our explanation and education to the doctors worked pretty well. And the doctors, they have started to prescribe our product, even if it was still in phase 2. And we had initial success. And I would say we have been good in terms of the storytelling with investors, but I would say we have been also good in terms of educating the doctors, and then the doctors, they did the job. They are talking between them. They said, you should try, because here we are talking about patients with a survival at 2 months of 20%. So those doctors, they are ready to try anything. And we have been always trying to help the patients and the doctors, and it has been appreciated. And from that, we have also built the story by explaining, which is true, that we are really a patient-centric company. And also we have few investors that are either family of patients or ex-patients as well. We raised a pretty decent amount of money after the IPO or at the IPO with patients and their family too.
Yeah. How has investor appetite improved with clinical progress? Have you seen people, that clinical progress kind of proving its way out into increased support for what you're doing?
So the investors, they have more appetite as we are generating clinical data because we are less risky. That is for sure. But where I've seen the most change, especially since we have entered the phase 3, is with the interest from the pharmaceutical company. Before that, it was difficult for the pharmaceutical company to buy a microbiome story. That was difficult. Now that we are in phase 3, and also now that we are expanding in solid tumors, which is a very trendy therapeutic area, we have a lot of discussions, but we have something that we had not before. We have an incoming call. Before that, we were running everywhere in the world with only limited success. Now it's like when we go to bio, for example, it's really way more comfortable as compared to what it was before. So that's where I've seen the most change. And it's also a little bit of hope for the field, because what we really need now is a validation with pharmaceutical company that they are interested in the field. And I think it's even more important than investors.
For emerging biotechs, scaling the process development and manufacturing of biologic molecules to clinical standards can be challenging. However, you don't need to go it alone. Don't miss an episode of the Business of Biotech podcast, where we offer insights on regulatory, funding, and other essential topics. The pod is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva, a global provider of technologies and services that advance and accelerate the development, manufacture, and delivery of therapeutics. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. There's a truth in biopharma around sort of the rising tide lifting all ships, right? Like when you see an approval in a specific indication or a specific modality, other companies in that same space tend to feel a lift, and it works the other way as well. Like when the market conditions are tough, and you see companies that are working in your space going downhill, it tends to drag the entire space down. What are you seeing now in terms of where the market goes from here? We've acknowledged the tough conditions. What are you seeing now is in terms of where the market goes from here and how your company is positioning itself to either take advantage of that or to differentiate itself from those companies that are kind of falling off?
I would say today we are at the phase where we have the advent of the first wave of companies, which comes with an advent of a first kind of modality. And the more we will be progressing in terms of waves, a little bit like for the COVID, we're going to have many waves, the more refined and complex will be the product. So today we are still at the edge of the donor-derived product, as evidenced by the approval of Rebiota and Vost in the US. So we would be very happy to see a commercial success in terms of having the regulatory approval, so that we are still in wave one. But we see more and more new companies emerging with either direct or indirect modalities that could be metabolites isolated from the gut. It could be phages, it could be consortia, it could be many things. So now we see more and more I would say products that are different. So we really start from the stools, and from that you can derivate many products. And from the first time also we see products that are not donor-derived products showing clinical benefit. That's what we see when you are going at Congress. And that's very promising, because that means, I'm not the kind of person who believe that one modality will check all the boxes. What we do for GVHD, for example, is very promising and everything, but I would agree that sometimes it might not be sufficient. You might need our product together with an immunosuppressant, for example. Yeah. So that's really the way I see it for the future. And the fact that we have many modalities, it's a very good sign. And as I said, we see data with products that are not donor-derived. There are different products. We see also others having good results in glioblastoma with molecules, so they are more in the peptide kind of modality. And that's a big boom. And I think, of course, we will need to find all the financial resources to support that. But I see the field really expanding from those initial success that we have mentioned already with the two approval in the US.
Yeah. I want to get my mind around your approach to clinical trials a little bit. You think about like this early microbiome therapeutic companies focusing on C. diff, which is a natural and kind of obvious indication. And you said, hey, we can go out there and make a clinical trial happen. It's a pretty direct route, right? Like, we're going to find patients with C. diff and we're going to enroll them in our clinical trial. Not so direct with GVHD. It's a more complicated patient recruitment process, I would assume. So tell me a little bit about that. How have you gone about navigating that patient recruitment aspect of your clinical trial in GVHD?
So first, we need to open a lot of centers to have only little number of patients. It's clear. When we will close the clinical trials, 1/3 of the clinical centers, they will not have recruited even one patient. So indeed, you need to have an infrastructure which is large. So that means you need to rely on a very, very robust CRO and everything. And you need to be close from the hospitals and the investigators. We are going on site. Every time there's a patient, they have questions. We work with them very closely because it's a first in class. They never manipulated such as a product. And that's, as I said, a patient, they are all dying, or close, all of them are dying. That's only 22% survival at 2 months. So that sometimes they could be hesitating to provide these product made of microorganism to a patient which is immunocompromised, which is understandable. So we have a specific structure. Every time we have a screening, we immediately call the center and everything. So that's for the GVHD program, which is a niche market. And then after that, we have another positioning for the second product, which is more adjuvant to the existing treatment. And here we are not that concerned with our recruitment. That's for all patients receiving stem cell transplantation. And here, especially in the hematology oncology field, now the potential of improving the outcome for the patient is well recognized by the doctors. So here, because it's an adjuvant, not directly treating the disease, I think it will be it will be more easy to recruit patients.
Yeah.
But the first trial in GVHD is indeed something where you need there's a French expression which says, if you want your cow to give milk, you need to be close from your cow. That's exactly what we do.
Yeah, I can see that. And I mean, you mentioned some of the stakeholders, obviously the patient, the doctors. You've made it very clear that that the relationship with the doctors has been very important. What about in this case, cell therapy companies? Like, have you found value in collaboration, some form of collaboration with the cell therapy companies that are administering these hematopoietic stem cell transplants?
Yeah. So today, to be very concrete, we see there's a few papers showing that the fact that you have a dysbiosis before stem cell, CAR T cell, for example, you have a lower outcome regarding the response to the CAR T. So we see a lot of academic centers now doing observation. They collect stool sample from the patients and everything. And now we see that there's a link between the quality of the response you get and the microbiome, the composition of the microbiome at baseline. So today, that's exactly where we are. We are exploring collaboration with academic centers to provide our products to, I would say, normalize the microbiome before the patient gets the CAR T cell. And that's another avenue where we think there's a potential. So it's a good point. And we are a little bit like where we were with the HSCT, the stem cell transplantation a few years ago, but it's also starting on the CAR T cell field. And when you see, I would say, the CAR T cell, when they work. But it's very, very, very expensive, and it comes with a toxicity. So the fact that you could improve or guarantee the results of your procedure is super important. So the potential here is also super, super important. And that's also the direction we are considering as we speak today.
Yeah. I got to ask you about this. I mentioned in the intro to the episode that you recently, I think in the springtime, emerged from an FDA clinical hold. Congratulations on that, by the way. Completely, one of those things that's not uncommon. Despite that hold, the company's progress towards phase 3 trials, I'm not saying it was lightning speed, but it was relatively quick. Like you've made good progress since founding the company. So I guess a two-part question. One, to what do you attribute the progress you've been able to make to get to this this point in your clinical trial effort? And then two, what advice would you give to other biopharma leaders who have a stumbling block along the way, who get hit with that pause, get hit with that pause button during their clinicals?
And answering first the second point, the issue that we were facing with the FDA is related to the fact that we are pulling the material to get a standardization and everything, which has not been a problem in Europe. It has been a problem when we wanted to go in the US. And as a European company, we were lucky enough to be able to continue the clinical trials in Europe. And we have accumulated data on, 150 patients as we speak today. Mm-hmm. And I think the FDA was pleased to see that we have human data showing that it's safe. So it has helped a lot in terms of the resolution. Of course, the FDA, they have requested other things in terms of the traceability and everything. But the most important is that we have been able to continue the clinical trial. So I would say the advice, if I'm legitimate to provide an advice, by the way, is first, don't give up. It's not because one agency is saying no that the other one gonna say no. And a patient is a patient. So let's continue where you can continue, because it's all about innovation. I mean, I'm not concerned about the fact that the FDA put us on hold. It's part of the process. The FDA has never approved in the past a full product. So they need time. They needed time for the evaluation. On top of that, that was at the timing of the COVID and everything. So it's part of the process. So you need to be able to multiply the opportunities to get patients. If I would have been a US company, I don't know if I would have survived, because if you are based in Boston, you have to validate your domestic market first, as we did in France. So I don't know if I would have survived if I would have been in the US. So my advice is really to multiply the channels. And so here we can leverage on the complexity of Europe, where you need to deal with 26 members. So it has a lot of drawback, but also here we have been able to continue the recruitment. So it's very important. It's innovation. That's what I learned from the IT field. You're going to fail sometimes. You're going to learn. I mean, it's part of the process. So that's very important to be able to continue your development. And why we have been recruiting that much? I mean, for example, the reference in hematology oncology is the ASH, American Society of Hematology, which is taking place once a year in the US. We have been presenting data. We are 8 years old company. We have presented data 6 years in a row, and we had oral presentation for the last 3 editions. And the microbiome, it's super trendy, even for the doctors. For the first presentation, it was only posters. We had a queue. We had a queue at the poster, which is not common. Yeah. And during the oral presentation, we fill the room pretty easily. So the microbiome is really something that the doctor, they are interested with. So based on this educational exercise that we did with the doctors, it has been very prolific then.
Yeah. You while we're on the regulatory topic, the company obtained orphan drug status. So tell us a little bit about what the advantage there was and what advice you might have for other companies who are pursuing some accelerated status with FDA and or EMA.
Yeah. So ODD, especially in Europe, is very advantageous because you do not pay for anything. For example, if you are ODD, you have an expansion of your exclusivity right on the data, and also you don't pay anything in Europe when you do the filling. So it's super advantageous. So the regulation in Europe is changing. That will become more and more difficult to get the ODD status, but it's recommended to go there. And then with the FDA, it has been difficult to interact with the FDA in person for the reason we know, COVID and everything. And I do not think we are back on track with having physical meeting, taking time to discuss the topics and everything. So I think having ODD and especially fast track designation and everything, that puts you in the priority to have really 2 meetings. I mean, not a written response only with the FDA, which sometimes could be challenging because it's difficult. You send a letter, you receive an answer. That sometimes could be difficult. So having that status is super important because once again, it's innovation, first in class. You need to multiply the interaction with the FDA. And if you don't have that, it's more difficult. So having those fast track designation and ODD is very important. It's very important.
Yeah. Excellent. I never thought about a global approach to clinical trials with multiple agencies as being like strategic from a redundancy perspective before. Like if things go a little bit haywire here, we can still perhaps move forward in this program. I always sort of thought of that strategy from a patient recruitment perspective, or a very, very specific patient population you're after kind of perspective. But it never really occurred to me that there's like risk avoidance and the redundancy of clinical trials in multiple regulatory jurisdictions.
I'm not from the field, so that's maybe why I've thought in a different manner. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just naive and I don't realize that that's like, very important thinking on everyone's part. But
I mean, all of us, US, Europe, everywhere, all of us, we want to bring innovations to patients, and we might have different concerns. And if you can validate some milestones with the different agencies, I know another microbiome company, for example, has been stuck in France for certain reasons. I know they have started in Belgium. They have provided human data, not non-clinical data. And from that, the French agency, they say, that's okay, you check the box.
Yep. Yeah. That's fascinating. So beyond oncology, you guys are working on investigating microbiome therapeutics and CNS diseases like ALS. So tell us a little bit about what's different between that approach and the approach you're taking in cancer.
So what I would say the scientific rationale is that within oncology, we are targeting to restore two things: the barrier function to avoid translocation of bad bugs and everything, plus the restoration of the immune homeostasis. In neurological and psychiatric disease, here it's a different story. That's the link between the gut and the brain mainly. Mm-hmm. And that's about the neuroinflammation, because most of the immune cells, 80% of the immune cells, they reside within the gut. So there's also a link between the neuroinflammation and the status of your gut. So that's the scientific rationale. But we have, among the neurological disorder, psychiatric disorder, we have not chosen Alzheimer, Parkinson. We have chosen exactly what we did for the GVHD. We have chosen a disease where the patients are dying. ALS, you have diagnosis from the time to death to diagnosis, it's 3 years maximum. Mm-hmm. So that's also where we have seen the most potential in terms of benefiting for the patients. So it's not a scientific reason, but in terms of the positioning, that was very important too. And here again, we work a lot with the patients. We have a patient association we have a collaboration with. A patient association is within the DSMB, Data Safety Monitoring Board. We have designed the clinical trial with the patients because, they have issues with the motility and everything. So we are doing a little bit like we did for the GVHD. Part of what we do is instructed by the patient themselves. And you get that when you have patients with very high unmet medical need. And that's what is in common with the strategic positioning in oncology and especially in GVHD. So two elements: the science, where there's good rationale. We see dysbiosis on patients with ALS, but also the positioning is driven by the intensity of the medical need.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that update. And thanks for the update on the clinical progress. You told me, I know we're running short on time here. You told me earlier in the conversation that this is the longest position that you've held consistently over the course of your career. 9 years, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've heard from multiple founders and CEOs in biopharma who've told me, like, it's every day I wake up, I feel like I'm working in a new job because there's a new challenge to face every day. So, it doesn't really get old. But what do you see coming down the pike for you? Like what's next? I want to get a perspective on what's next for you and also what's next for MaaT Pharma, like where the company's going from here and where you see yourself going from here.
Yeah, for MaaT Pharma first, I've sequenced the different phases of the company because at each time you go from phase A to B, you have to change the resources, the skills you need and everything. So today we are at phase 4, which is a pre-commercialization. So for me, it will be super exciting to see with MaaT Pharma two things. the commercialization of the first product, MaaT 13. That would be for me something, I want to put in my cheminée at home. And the second element, we have not discussed that much today about that, but we have also designed a new technology, which would be a donor independent, co-cultivating very complex technology that we have developed. I like to see the proof of concept, meaning a phase 2 on that technology, because I'm a co-inventor of this technology too. So that will be my achievement at MaaT Pharma. Once that is done, for me, I like to mix a little bit more what I've learned in the past with the IT things, and especially artificial intelligence and everything. I think there's something to do which is at the cross between the artificial intelligence and microbiome. I believe there's many things to do on that field. So that may be for me of interest.
Yeah. That new technology, real quick on that, the new technology that you referenced, is that sort of a platform technology, or is that a technology that you anticipate will develop or result in new and different candidates for MaaT Pharma?
It's a platform that will generate new candidates, and what's disruptive and unique regarding the technology is, in fact, that we have identified, for example, to start with the application, it will be more easy to explain. We said this patient to respond to immunotherapy, he needs this kind of phenotype with the microbiome. So we have developed a technology where we can assemble ecosystems together and we can grow them together. So what knows to do the industry is to grow one bacteria and then you do an assembly. But us, what we believe is that the ecosystem is very important. And the ecosystem, the normal microbiome is roughly 250 species. You have 250 species. I have 250 species, hopefully. And what we are doing with this technology is we are growing the bacteria together. And that's where is the technical challenge, because one bacteria could take 20 minutes to reproduce, or they can take longer. So if you don't control the process, at the end of the day, you have one bug, because it will take over the control on everything. And we have managed to define a process where you can grow the bacteria together by keeping the similarity, which provide you an opportunity to have like no limit in terms of the scalability. Because if you do an assembly of different bugs, you need hundreds of bioreactors. Here, it's a production where you have one system and you can produce unlimited amount of material.
Wow. All right. So that's part 2. We're out of time, but part 2, when I have you back on the show, Hervé, part 2 will be on building a complete microbiome ecosystem, and then part 3 will be on Hervé's new adventures with artificial intelligence and the microbiome technology. How about that?
Let's hope you are true. Yeah, let's it's a good conclusion.
We'll go with that. I'm going to let you off the hook for today, but I really appreciate you coming on. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I thank you for the glimpse into what's going on at MaaT Pharma.
Thank you very much, Matt, and talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
Bye.
So that's MaaT Pharma founder and CEO, Hervé Affagard. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online with the support of Cytiva, which demonstrates its commitment to new and emerging biopharma companies at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. If you like listening in on conversations with biopharma leaders like Hervé, subscribe to the Business of Biotech podcast and sign up for my newsletter at bioprocessonline.com/BOB. Also, be sure to leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing. And as always, thanks for listening.